Okay, without further ado, I'll hand over to Kate Tett, Director of the Great Britain Northern Ireland campaign, to tell us a great story, or the great story, learnings from 12 years promoting the UK. There will be more members of the great team joining Kate on stage, so I'll let her introduce them. Thank you.
Get my face off there immediately and on to great. So thank you, everyone. We're delighted to be here, delighted to be invited. Less delighted to have the graveyard shift after lunch, so we're going to do our best to keep you entertained. We're going to talk a bit, as Conrad said, about the journey of great and things that we've learned over running a nation brand for the last 12 or 13 years, and hopefully we're going to have some time for Q&A at the end, so do save up your questions as we go. And as Conrad said, I'm joined by some colleagues who I will introduce, but all part of the team. So, Great Britain Northern Ireland campaign, or Great to our friends. You may or may not have heard of it. I hope that people in this room have heard of it to some extent, but you may not know much about the history of it. So just as a very brief history lesson, Great has existed since 2011. It came about as a response to London hosting the 2012 Olympic Games. And the view at the time was that clearly that was a big opportunity for the UK on the world stage, and that we needed to operate as one clear, compelling voice for the UK rather than lots of disparate voices. And at the time, the way that UK government was organised, there were multiple different departments into the 20s, all with different ideas of what they wanted to communicate about the Olympic Games. And so the story goes, somebody in number 10 bashed some heads together and said, don't come back into this room until you've got a very clear single message about the UK, not 22 different ones. And from that, Great was born. And Great has evolved a lot during that time. So it started to take on more and more sectors and sort of had a broader reach. And now we talk about it as a programme. So not just a brand, it's much broader than that, but a programme which both enhances the UK's reputation internationally, but crucially, a programme which drives economic growth for the UK right across all of the nations and across a whole range of sectors. And the way that we do that is by encouraging an international audience to visit us, to study, to trade and invest, and also to come and live and work in the UK. The broad shape of the campaign has evolved over those 12 years, and broadly we have these sort of 5 buckets, the way that we communicate to our audiences. So the ones across the bottom are pretty straightforward. We, as I said, encourage our audience to visit, to trade and invest, to study, and also live and work. But latterly, we've also done a lot of work on the line at the top, overall consideration and influence. And that's reflective of the fact that we take an audience-first approach to everything that we do. We know that our international audience don't really care which government department has responsibility for what, and they certainly don't think about the UK in silos. So the type of individual who might be making a big investment or trade decision is also likely to have disposable income to consider visiting us as a tourist. They might think about educating themselves or their children internationally. They might be thinking about living and working internationally. So their perception of the UK is built up from all of these different strands, and that's really important in the way that we operate. We see great synergy when we cross-reference different campaigns, and we do a lot of work around retargeting between our campaigns. So if you're seeing a trade and investment message from us, you've likely already seen a tourism message and those type of synergies. Just in terms of governance, people often ask us how on earth has Great survived for 12 years in government. It's quite rare for a campaign to last that long, and certainly for a brand to exist that long in an organisation which isn't fundamentally brand first in the way that many private sector organisations are. And I think the secret probably is in the governance as well as what we are able to deliver. So we have a great programme board which is chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister, who sits in the Cabinet Office here. But also we have one foot in the private sector, and we'll talk a little bit more about partnerships later, but a really important part of our governance is that we have a private sector council. So that's chaired by Ewan Venters, who is the CEO of Hauser & Wirth, but also includes CEOs and other C-suite level individuals from lots of different British businesses, HSBC, the British Fashion Council, the Premier League, the BBC, among others. And that's really, they provide a really important advisory role to us. We also work very closely with the international network across government, so working with our posts and embassies in lots of different countries. And finally, we work with lots of different partners within government. So we run the Great campaign out of the Cabinet Office, but we work very closely with campaign partners in lots of other departments who deliver on our behalf. And again, that's crucial to the model and why it has continued to survive and thrive within government. A little sort of snapshot, I suppose, of where we are 12 or 13 years on from the campaign launch. So last year we were active in 164 different markets. That's a whole range of different scales of activity, from huge paid campaigns in some of our biggest markets, right down to just brand presence in smaller markets at embassy events. We still are very proud that we're uniting 22 different government departments under the brand, as well as many arm's length bodies and private sector businesses which choose to use the brand. Value in kind is something which we work really hard on, and sponsorship, as I said, we have one foot in the private sector, but last year we generated over £30 million worth of value in kind and sponsorship for the campaign, which is another 50% on our budget as set by government. We have an average return on investment of 15-1, which I think is very impressive, which is maintained across the campaign. And we have a very tight methodology for that, which has been audited by lots of external agencies and is continuing to. And I think that's another secret to the success of Great. And finally, we execute over 1,000 different events and activations on average every year. And as I said, there's a huge scale of that, but it just gives you a bit of a sense of the type of scale of operation that we're running. So now I've just got a short video which gives you a bit of a flavour of the type of things that you might see among those 1,000 different activations each year across the globe. So that was a little taster of the type of activity, and now we're going to talk in a bit more detail about some of the pillars that underpin that activity and the way that we work. And to start us off, Chaz, who is our head of brand, is going to talk to you about brand and the importance of consistency.
Thank you, Kate. I always get, you sit on stage and you're staring at those things and you want to stare over your shoulder and stare at your own content a little bit. I will say that working on this brand is one of the greatest privileges I've had in my career, and I don't think I will ever get bored of the content that we have to work with and the content that we generate off the back of that. It's also quite nice and reassuring to stare out over a sea of faces with people actually going, and sometimes that's excitement and sometimes it's, what the hell is that? Which is equally reassuring. Kate spoke a little bit about the history of the campaign, but I think it bears repeating just slightly. So, Great was instigated in the run-up to the Olympics, and there's a certain amount of excitement that comes with something like that. And when you have a moment in time, when you have that peg, you have a captive audience and you have a group of people there that want to be told a fabulous story. So it's quite an easy job to a very great extent. And then you realize that once that moment's gone, you actually have a job to do. And when that job is building a brand, which is something that gets embedded over time and builds equity and builds ownership and builds recognition, it needs more to underpin it, that's what I'm going to talk to you about today from a brand perspective. It's about what we utilize to underpin the brand excitement, if you like, as it exists. So when the Olympics were over and we were still having great success, we realized that further to all of that development, we ultimately were going to need to look at the brand and see what those aspects were that were underpinning everything that we did. So in 2020, we undertook a strategic review of the campaign, which delivered insight into both how the brand and the nation were perceived. And just looking back at what came out of that insight were what we call the 4 truths of great within the brand terms. And that is that the UK is seen as diverse and tolerant, it's independently minded, it's creative and innovative across a range of sectors that we work with, and it has that unique mix of old and new, which is both a blessing and a curse in brand terms, because half your market wants to see one thing and the other half wants to see or be sold another. And I think we've kind of weaponized that to a certain extent. That's what we call the great duality now, utilizing heritage almost as a gateway drug to the story that we actually want to tell beyond that. But once you've established those truths, what you need to then do is you need to build what we all know as the foundations of great. Now, it's actually a relatively small session today, but if this was a smaller session, if this was a hack day, this is where we'd get all interactive and I'd be going, what makes a good brand platform and what do we actually utilize to build out that kind of thing? I will spare you that level of interactivity, mostly because it's after lunch and everyone's looking a little bit sleepy. Probably more due to my speech than anything else. But when you're building a platform, it's about delivering that strategic direction. So when we look at it in these terms. If we have a platform, that will allow us to have the direction, that theme to underwrite everything that we communicate. If we have a platform, that allows us to have a reference point, something that we can check everything against, and it keeps us on track. It means that we don't just do the fun things, the clever things, the exciting things with no purpose behind them. And if you have a platform, it allows you to measure what successful delivery looks like. Now, this is beyond the insight, or before the insight, if you like. This is before you go out to market to find out whether things have landed. You can value check it against your platform to say, are we really in the right place, and how are we measuring that? I think the one thing about platforms from a brand perspective, when you dig into them, is that as an industry, I fundamentally believe that we overcomplicate them. For every descriptor of platform that you speak to anybody about, you will find a different definition. And there are probably 40 or 50 different terms for every different thing that we talk about within a platform. Great makes no apology for trying to cut through that noise right from the very start, and I think that has something to do with the fact that that platform didn't necessarily exist when it was first instigated, if you like. Our theory on the platform is that we need 3 things. We need a purpose, we need a position, and we need a trajectory. And just explaining those a little bit simpler, why we exist, how we define ourselves, and how we deliver against all of our aims. Those 3 elements come together into a unifying thought. Some people would describe it as a North Star statement, a guiding light, a principle, a tagline, if you will. But you need the first 3 in order to establish the 4th. So taking those 3 things one by one before we get to the unification element. Great's purpose. We exist to drive growth and enhance reputation for the UK. We've been that way since 2011. That driving ambition has always been there. It's been wordsmithed over the years, and I suppose to a certain extent it's been made more relevant to a more modern age and our place in a changed world. But broadly speaking, our aim has always been that, to drive growth, enhance reputation for the UK. The position, how we define ourselves within that, is that we are the catalyst for new possibilities for the world and its people. And this is a fundamental change from when GREAT started. When GREAT was instigated, we were broadly positioned as being out there to demonstrate that we can be the greatest, and therefore you need to follow what we do. Now, there's a certain amount of that statement which is a little bombastic, it's a little empirical, it tends to rub people up the wrong way in a global economy. So this is a real sea change for GREAT, and since we rebranded, this has been the position that we have. But taking those statements within that, the catalyst for new possibilities, we see ourselves as the spark, as the instigators, not the be-all and end-all, not the guiding light. The method by which we can achieve greatness together is how we often describe it. The trajectory, we do this by encouraging the world to see things from fresh perspectives. Now, I think what's interesting about that is seeing things from fresh perspectives applies equally to challenges, to ourselves, to our place within it, and to our aims and ambitions together in partnership. So when those three statements come together, they formulate our unifying thought, our North Star statement, our brand platform in summary, which is see things differently. And to that previous point, see things differently is, it has its own duality. So it's about seeing the challenges that we face together differently. It's about seeing the partnerships differently. It's about seeing our relationships differently and our place in the world differently, as well as seeing a different side of the UK, looking at the UK in a different way from a fresh perspective, but crucially, doing all of those things together. Now, the thing about a brand platform is that until you have all of that, you can't get to all of this. So there are always different takes on a visual language or a brand from a visual perspective, but from my perspective, if you don't have the foundation, if you don't have the aspects which underpin everything we do, it doesn't matter what color you paint it, it doesn't matter what logo you put on it, it doesn't matter what your content is, because it all has to be value checked and relevant to the platform, to your messaging. But this is the point where you begin to build equity through recognition, through ownership, through that kind of global consistency that we want out there. And once you've established that, you can then dig into your narrative. And these are just three examples of how we indicate stories through GREAT. And I think it is worth mentioning at this point that the way that we communicate is to take those micro stories, those little stories, those personal stories of the UK, see how they ladder up to the themes that we need to communicate, and again, from my perspective, touch people here. Actually get to that emotional connection. Put a brand in someone's pocket, speak to them where they are. And that's our narrative angle. Once you have those narrative angles, once you've built out those, that's when you get to the really fun bits. That's when you get to be able to individualize your brand and visual language for the particular markets, for the particular sectors, and you generate all of the really cool stuff, which I believe your next speaker is going to talk about. I'm going to hand over to Alex Tucker, who heads up the campaigns and partnerships team, to talk about the good stuff.
You know, it hands out.
Very graceful.
Right, well, how can I follow that? Thank you, Chad. So, partnerships. Partnerships is fundamental to everything we do at GREAT since we started the campaign back in 2011. What do we mean by partnerships? GREAT works with hundreds of different organisations every year, from multinational British brands, your Premier Leagues, your Burberrys, your Aston Martins, through to interesting SMEs with a compelling story to tell about the UK, through to trade bodies, British Fashion Council, the BPI on the music side, but also high-profile individuals, talent, that really can help the campaign, the UK, get cut through with our audience. And there's just a sample of some of those. You'll be familiar with the Heathrow imagery, I'm sure, and many of the other airport terminals as well. But we work with partners across the globe in many different ways. Why do we need great partners? Firstly, credibility, trust. Chaz just touched on this to some extent. They are the lifeblood, they're the stories. That's how you get to people's hearts, is through those authentic, those credible stories of the UK. People, trust in government continues to decline. So we work with business, we work with individuals to surface those stories and build that affinity, that favourability with our audiences. Endorsement. Again, this works, to Kate's point earlier, the longevity of the campaign is partly down to those relationships that we've built with the private sector. We have champions throughout business that, whichever administration is in power at the time, can lobby on our behalves for a nation brand, for the Great campaign, which is hugely important. But they also endorse the campaign to those audiences that I mentioned as well. Lovely picture of Joan Collins, who's still at the age of 95, 94, still going strong, promoting the UK around the world. The third, influence. Premier League is probably the best example of this, and I'll touch on a case study later. But the reach that they have with our audiences is hugely important, and we try to leverage that as much as we can. Reach, I've touched on. We've got Ed Sheeran and one of our chef ambassadors, Vineet Bhatia, at the bottom there. Our talent, our partners, they have millions of followers on their social channels. We dream one day of getting to that level. We can only dream. But David Beckham alone, 84 million followers, and he consistently supports the campaign and promotes positive messages about the UK on our behalf. Next one, strategic advice. Kate touched on this, our private sector council. Expert opinion. We constantly need to be challenged by the private sector. We need to make sure with all our audiences, from a tourism, trade, study perspective, that we are targeting those audiences in the right way. And that private sector experience is crucial to helping guide us on that. Sponsorship, value in kind. We like to show up in creative ways, whether that's Aston Martin providing cars for showcases, Michelin-starred chefs turning up and hopefully wooing high net worth investors with some brilliant British cooking. But also sometimes some kind of cold hard cash is also very helpful when government budgets continue to be squeezed. So again, we hugely rely on private sector for their continued support. We've got a couple of videos from a few advocates of ours, both the Premier League, Tim Vine, Director of UK and International Public Affairs, just to give you a quick flavour of how we've worked with the Premier League, and then on to one of our chef ambassadors, Adam Handling, Scottish chef, who actually filmed this a couple of days ago live from Turkey, where he is working with the British Embassy in Ankara to do a kind of gastro-diplomacy few days. So just a couple of videos.
The Premier League's proud to be a long-term partner to the Great Campaign, having worked with them from the very start. This partnership works in a number of different ways, from collaborating on match screenings, bringing the Premier League trophy to great events, or showcasing the huge impact that the Premier League has on incoming international tourism numbers to the UK. We've also looked to showcase the massive work that the Premier League does in helping develop the grassroots of football around the world through its renowned programme Premier Skills. We're very pleased to be a long-term partner to Great and look forward to the future with them.
I'm Adam Handling, and I'm here in Turkey for the Great campaign to actually promote great British food out here, which is something I love to do. When I get to inspire, motivate, educate people around the world about how good food is in the UK, how we are now thinking about it, being as sustainable as possible, using everything that we have from this wonderful island, it's a real pleasure to be a part of Great campaign.
There we go. For those of you who are fans of Great British Menu on BBC, you might recognise Adam as one of the judges on there. But two brilliant organisations and individuals that support the campaign across the globe. So I just wanted to touch on a quick case study, the Premier League. We're here today to talk about soft power. I think the Premier League is undoubtedly the UK's top soft power asset. It's broadcast to over 1 billion people in 190 countries around the globe. 900 million social followers across the Premier League and the club accounts. So it has incredible reach across the globe and really helps portray a positive message about the UK. We work with the Premier League in lots of different ways. We have access to Premier League content, imagery, video. Most organisations would pay millions of pounds for that kind of access. We're able to use that and use it as a promotion tool for the UK. We use it to promote the fact that over 119 different nationalities have played for the Premier League since its inception in the early 90s. That in turn, we believe, sends a positive message about the UK, being welcoming, being tolerant, and really inviting the world to come play and be, the best player that they can be, playing in the Premier League. We also work with the Premier League around the globe. For example, watch parties, live screenings. Our embassy network hosts 10 to 15 screenings of live games each year, where we bring Premier League legends, former players, pundits. We host Q&As, we take the trophy out to market. It's a brilliant opportunity to engage stakeholders that perhaps our local teams may not be able to get in the room normally, but the opportunity to meet one of their legends or a legend from their team that they supported as a kid or hold the Premier League trophy, that kind of access and opportunity really helps open doors. We also hold coaching sessions with the Premier League. UK governments in general often struggle to reach young people in their own countries, let alone in other countries. The Premier League is brilliant in terms of bringing young people and that future audience, if you like, the future tourists, the future students, the future traders. Building that affinity, that favourability from a young age helps to future-proof the UK's soft power offering in the future. But the Premier League also helps us with UK government events. So global investment summits, big conferences that the UK hosts. The Premier League is always willing to help, support, bring the trophy along and offer that kind of money can't buy experience, which is so valuable for us as a campaign. Just to give you a quick example, just last autumn, the Premier League worked with GREAT and the High Commission or the Consulate in Mauritius and also the Mauritius government to organise a football tournament and coaching session for young people. First time anything of this scale had happened in Mauritius. Having the Premier League there was just brilliant from a soft power perspective for UK government. It obviously got huge media pickup. The Prime Minister attended the final of the tournament. So again, from that kind of UK-Mauritius bilateral relationship, having the Premier League there just gave us a brilliant opportunity to leverage that. Just to give you a flavour of how else we incorporate partners within our campaigns. So as Kate touched on at the start, we deliver a whole range of different activity and we deliver 2 to 3 major campaigns each year that are all about driving perception change of the UK, but also about driving, obviously, investment, tourists and students to the UK. We launched the Unicorn Kingdom last March. The objective here, as it says on the screen, was to change that perception of UK tech. The UK tech ecosystem is incredibly strong. We're the 3rd biggest tech economy in the world. We've got 160 unicorns, more than France, Germany, and Netherlands combined. But the perception of UK tech isn't as positive. So we have a job to do to go out and change that perception. So we launched the Unicorn Kingdom predominantly in the west coast of the US last year. Whole range of different activities from investor roundtables through to paid media, partnerships with the likes of TechCrunch, a big media partnership. But what we realized was we can surface those case studies of tech, which is brilliant and integral to a marketing campaign. But what's really going to get the venture capitalists in the room, those money can't buy experiences, and offer them something different, because they're constantly bombarded with marketing, with events, with corporate opportunities. How can we really kind of cut through? And that's where our partners create that magic. And so we worked with the likes of Universal Music, one of the biggest record labels in the world, Sir Lucian Grange, who's the CEO, British CEO of Universal, and he helped us bring an up-and-coming British star, a lady called Olivia Dean, who's now a Brit-nominated artist, out to the west coast of the US to perform intimate gig with a group of venture capitalists. We also took Adam out there, our Michelin-starred chef, and he, again, put on a brilliant show of British food and drink. So it's thinking about how you can use the UK kind of soft power to reach audiences that are really, normally hard to reach. So it just hopefully gives you a flavour. Coming to the end of my section, just want to talk about great ambassadors. So these are individuals who give their time to the campaign completely free of charge. We don't pay for talent. So they lend their time, and obviously motivation for this is hopefully partly patriotic, supporting the UK, supporting the nation brand. But there's always something in it for them. Often that might be being in a room with high-profile stakeholders that perhaps they wouldn't normally get access to, buyers from a commercial perspective. It might be trying to reach new audiences in different markets. Our local teams around the world obviously have expertise. We can help, we can support them, we can give them that boost in market. But they are integral, and we work with hundreds every year across a huge range of different sectors and across the whole of the Great family. And just to give you a little example of this through a campaign, which we're all at the campaign very proud of, our Great Love campaign. So it's been running for several years, but it's all about promoting the UK as a tolerant, as a welcoming place, particularly for an LGBTQ plus community. There's a soft power angle to this, but there's also a tourism opportunity. And positioning the UK as kind of world leading in this area, we've seen bring huge benefit from an ROI, from a return investment perspective, as well as the soft power. But given the subject matter, we do have to kind of tread very carefully. And we also really rely on credible voices to help tell that authentic story of the UK. So you'll see on the screen here, we worked with a huge range of different advocates within the LGBTQ plus community as part of our relaunch of the campaign last year, featured within case studies, within paid media activity, and that was supported by the likes of LEVC, who provide the black cab at the bottom there, and we essentially entered that into the World Pride in Sydney as part of the parade. And also just to flag, Cunard in the background there very kindly also hosted a reception as part of the Great Love campaign, and even a drone show as well. So hopefully that just gives you a flavour of the types of partners that we're able to bring in and work with, but they are very much the lifeblood of the campaign. And I will finish there and hand over to Robin, who is the Head of Applied Innovation at the Government Communication Service. And I will also try to avoid falling off the stage.
Thanks, Alex. And I have to say, my favourite word from that whole presentation was gastro-diplomacy. I definitely need to get myself a slice of that particular pie. Thank you for the laugh. So, hi everyone, I'm Robin. I'm the Head of Applied Innovation at the Government Communications Service. My role is to drive our agenda for innovation across government communications. You might be asking, how does this fit into the great picture that we've presented here about GREAT? I wanted to start by taking just a step back and talking about the role and importance of innovation within government communications. So in 2022, in our Performance with Purpose strategy, we identified that innovation and improvement really needs to be at the heart about how we think about delivering government communications to both support the messaging of the government of the day and to support delivery of high-quality public services. And that's because we recognise that communications, advertising and marketing really sits at the forefront of new technologies, both in terms of how the internet continues to evolve and grow, new ways of speaking to audiences, and new technologies that are arriving every day in our fast-paced world. So we need to be aware of those so we can seize the opportunities that they present. We also need to be live to the risks and challenges that come with seizing these new opportunities. And to do that, to set out a roadmap about how we are going to systematically embrace an innovative mindset to delivering government communications, and importantly, embrace emerging technologies and new applications of data. In about a month's time, we'll be releasing our new innovation and data strategy for government communications, all around making sure that we can encourage innovation within government communications, identify both new opportunities and new risks that come with those in order to tackle them, test promising new innovations to validate their value for government communications, and then scale those that are successful in order to maximise the benefits there. What's very important is that we keep our ethical values at the heart of this approach to make sure that we are both using taxpayers' money responsibly, but also strengthening trust in government communications, not undermining it as we embrace this journey towards innovation. So the strategy will have 3 core pillars, and I'll touch on these very briefly because we have limited time. The first one will be empowering government communicators in central government departments and ALBs to embrace responsible innovation. So this will be putting at the heart of our approach the ethical principles and values that govern our work as civil servants, but also that are key to government communications. Things like the Civil Service Code and principles such as integrity, impartiality, and accuracy. Secondly, we'll be delivering new tools and platforms from the central team at the Cabinet Office, for teams all across government communications. And these will be in 3 priority areas. The first will be the responsible application of generative AI, more on that to come. The second will be responsible use of data and emerging data sources that are arriving every day. And the third will be the ability to tailor and personalise government communications to a degree that before would have been cost prohibitive, to ensure that we're increasing the relevance and impact of our messaging to all of the different audiences that we need to reach. And then finally, the third pillar will be creating a shared culture of innovation across GCS. And this comes to really making sure that in every stage of delivering a government campaign, whether that's paid for, organic, or an activation, that we are both encouraging thinking innovatively, inclusively and openly, but also identifying those opportunities and risks to test and scale, as I mentioned before. So to bring it back to GREAT, so GREAT has really been a pioneer of innovation, I would say, within government communications. So we've just got 2 case studies here I'd like to share with you. You may have seen this chap in some of the images that have been shared today. So for the Great Tourism campaign, we also go Visit Britain. We needed an asset to be at the front and centre of this campaign throughout the different waves. But the challenge was that we had limited time in order to identify a character, perhaps commission an agency to do some photography, work through the license rights of all the different applications that we wanted to use this for. So what the team did is they used generative AI to create this quintessential, rather stereotypical, but really impactful and recognisable image of a quintessential English gentleman that we could adapt and use for our purposes at a greater scale and cost effectiveness that we would have been able to otherwise within the time available. And this means that we've ended up with a character and image that is not recognisable as an individual person. We're not replicating the likeness of a real person. So it avoids things like usage rights issues that come with that, and is unique to Visit Britain marketing, so you won't see this anywhere else, and helps create a strong visual identity and visual brand around the campaign. So that's just one example of how generative AI can be applied very tangibly within government communications. The second one, and this is one of my personal favourites, was the Mad for It campaign. I've probably not used the right accent to say that. This was again through Visit Britain. But as part of this campaign, we wanted to drive reach and engagement with the campaigns, particularly with US audiences. So based on the insight that Americans love a British accent, and that Britain is home to one of the highest densities of different accents anywhere in the world, we brought that idea to life through the power of AI speech recognition technology. And what this did, it was trained on over 500 native accents here within the United Kingdom. And it created a fun little challenge where American audiences could engage with this content and try and do their best to replicate that accent. And then the AI tool would kind of recognize that and give them a score. But it created a very interactive and tangible way that people could get to grip with the social fabric of the United Kingdom and the sheer diversity within that in a really personal way and have a bit of fun at the same time. And so we had great results in this particular one, and it really helped drive the campaign. So those are some very specific applications of AI when it comes to delivering communications. But for us as government communicators, AI technologies, and in particular large language models, offer great opportunities to help us in how we do the doing of delivering government communications. And we see the value of applying this technology in a responsible way in 4 key areas. The first is productivity and cost, helping us do what we do better and quicker. So cutting down the time it takes to do those more repetitive tasks or to generate the first draft of an idea. The second is quality. So with the right tools, we can ensure that our best practice standards and frameworks, of which we have many within government communications, which help us be at the forefront, it makes it easier to integrate this into our work. So you don't have to have memorized the entire of the OASIS framework or the Krebs methods or COM-B to do behavioral science. You can use these tools to help engage with these frameworks and apply them proactively in your role. The third area, and my favorite, is creativity and ideation. When used properly, generative AI can really act as an agent provocateur, helping you consider new ideas and new perspectives on a topic or issues. So for me, this is particularly important when we're trying to think of the different audiences that we need to reach for a particular campaign and how we can consider new ways to reach them, both in tone, format, and messaging. Generative AI is really powerful at creating or identifying new opportunities. And the fourth area is audiences. So the ability to bring our rich and diverse audience data together and surface insights from that sea of information to make sure we're being as targeted and as effective as we can in delivering our campaign outcomes. But in order to realise these four benefits, we realise that for our members, we need to provide them training, so understanding how this technology works, so they know why it's important that we do things like look out for things like discrimination or bias within outputs. So that's how to recognise that, why that's important to help us avoid that. Obviously, checking for bias is something that we always have to do within communication, so this isn't a new challenge, but we need to understand how these technologies work if we're going to do that effectively with their application. And the other area is really embracing our ethical values and principles, which I mentioned before. We know that things like legislation and regulation often lags behind innovation. So there isn't usually a clear, yes or no, this is a right way to apply a new technology or a new type of data. So we fall back on the ethical principles that we have to help guide us here and work through that. And one of the practical ways we're going to be doing that within the Government Communication Service is that we're developing what we're calling an AI co-pilot, but we're trying to think of a snappier name for that. As advertising and marketing professionals, we should be good at that. But the aim is to use AI technology to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of how we deliver government comms internally. And to achieve that, we're creating a conversational AI tool that will be accessible to members of GCS across government that will help you rapidly source the best collective GCS communications practice in helping them design communications. And ultimately, our aim is for this tool to be a private and secure conversational model where members can use it in the confidence the information is not going to leave the government estate, to help us realise the opportunities that this technology provides that aren't currently accessible with more commercial and off-the-shelf solutions. Right, with that, I appreciate there was a lot of information we've covered collectively, so we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm going to invite Kate back up just to help us through that.
Thanks, Robin. So yeah, that was a whistle-stop tour of sort of the last 12 years, but particularly the three pillars that we think have been fundamental to great success and its continued thriving. So those being brand and consistency that sits with that, partnerships, and then also innovation. But I think if there was one thing that hopefully you take away from today, it's really that our approach has always been about audience first and never looking at that audience in isolation, understanding that our audience are human beings and fundamentally they form a view of the UK from lots of different places. I think Alex mentioned, these ideas are being formed right from childhood and partners can play a really important role in that. And that's the way that we have structured the Great brand and why we feel so passionately that operating under one brand across all of government international comms is extremely important. We have actually kept time miraculously despite the fall, which I thought was very sort of British on brand actually, Chaz, so well done for doing that. So we do have some time now to take any questions if anybody would like to ask. Hello. Oh, sorry. I think they're bringing a mic to you. It's quite the setup.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the brand ambassadors. Do you pay them? They are enrolled for like a year, or it's just one time?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah.
You can talk from there, I think.
Go on, you do it. Oh, sorry.
Your mic's up.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. So firstly, no, we don't pay our brand ambassadors. So they always support the campaign. They don't ask for a fee. And it can be either on a kind of prolonged basis. So some of the individuals have worked with the campaign, since its inception in 2011. But some, it can be an ad hoc activity We'd love for David Beckham to be promoting the UK on a kind of weekly basis on his social channels. In reality, if we can get 1 or 2 promotions per year, that's brilliant for us. But we're always obviously constantly looking to evolve our network as well. So the ambassadors that worked with us 10, 11 years ago might not be the right ambassadors for today. Thinking about different markets or different trends and different technologies, the role of influencers and different social platforms, how can we really leverage that as well?
Hello.
Hi, I'm Konrad Jagodziński, Brand Finance. I'm going to ask you how you measure success and ROI for the GREAT campaign. That's a very self-serving question as well.
Is a very thanks for setting that up, Konrad. So interesting that you said success and then you got straight to ROI. I'd say those are 2 separate things. So ROI is one element of success that we measure. I mentioned a 15-to-1 ROI that we work to, and that does vary across the campaign. As you can imagine, there are elements of the campaign which generate a much bigger ROI than that, and there's ones that generate smaller, but that's the sort of average. We've got quite complicated econometric models across all the different types of audiences that we have. So as an example for tourism, we would be looking at individuals who are influenced by the campaign, which would be measuring both in sort of an inward passenger survey. We'd be tracking their progress right from interacting with sort of digital comms with us through the website and then out into their journey to the UK, how much they're spending, how long they're spending in the UK, what sort of interactions they're having, what sort of sites they're visiting, and then building a profile which, through econometric modelling, we then strip out any external factors. So, and we have different systems depending on the different audiences, but bring that all together to be one piece. I think importantly, that is one measure of ROI, but I often joke that if ROI was the only measure that we are interested in, I would put my entire campaign budget into Chinese students and I would see a huge return and I wouldn't do anything anywhere else. But of course, there are lots of other factors of success. We're looking at a few key things. One is around the value in kind and sponsorship, which sort of Alex nodded to. We are a government campaign. We are not flush with cash in the way that the private sector is. And actually, those private sector partnerships, both in terms of the value in kind, but also the sponsorship, are really, really important. So all of our campaigns are measured against their ability to generate those kind of relationships and return. We're also looking at the value of the brand. So we very much see the brand as a valuable asset in its own right to government. That is quite an alien concept within government. I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, brand is not sort of a known language within government, but the value of it as its own asset is really, really important. And so in all of the activity we're doing, we're looking at how we build the value of that brand, how we can use it to sort of prime the path for lots of activity that we're doing. So ROI is definitely one measure, and we're confident in our ability to return that, but I think those other success metrics are also really important. The final one that we looked at is obviously sort of perception change and behaviour change, which inevitably leads to ROI. So we have lots of different forms of research, but the things that are really important to us are the key consideration drivers within each audience that we know are going to move people along a purchase or consideration journey with the UK. So again, all of our campaigns will look to have those metrics, specific statements that we're looking to move, and we'll be measuring against those on a sort of campaign by campaign basis as well as at a whole campaign level. So those are the sort of 4 elements of success that we measure. Hello. The roving mic on its way.
Thank you. If I understood you correctly, I think you mentioned about around 14 organizations were linked or brought under this great brand. So I'm just wondering, if you can explain a little bit on this, because coming to Bhutan, we said our brand is for the whole nation. So when you said this, I was very interested. What you actually meant by that? Around 14 plus organizations were linked or associated with this brand.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, absolutely great. Much like your brand in Bhutan is for the whole nation. I think practically what I'm talking about is organisations who have a marketing budget and are looking to spend that internationally and therefore need to execute under a brand. So yeah, we have 22 different government organisations and then arm's length bodies who are sort of an extension of government who use the brand. That might be anybody from the Department for Business and Trade who would be running campaigns on trade and investment, to Visit Britain who are doing tourism, smaller departments like DEFRA who would look at food and drink. So they will all have their own independent campaign budgets, but would still be executing under a central brand strategy and brand of great. Does that answer that? Thanks.
I think just building out on that a little bit from Kate's perspective, that's one of the strengths of having, I'll go back to the brand platform, but having a consistent brand that can look at the insight from all of those different bodies with their different needs, their different sectors, their different markets, and generate something which will speak with a little nuance and a little specificity, will speak to all of those individual markets from a central perspective. Because, as Kate alluded to, crossing over between those different audiences, sectors, departments, markets, builds a stronger central brand as a whole. It builds out that equity of respect that if you've seen something in trade, you can apply to tourism. If you've seen it in tourism, you can apply to study. And that's really from my perspective, one of the greatest success stories of Great, is that consistent crossover into those different markets.
Hello.
Hi.
We've lost the mic. Oh no, you've got it.
Yes, thank you. It's very interesting and very inspiring. Thank you very much. And also not just a historical thing, but also looking forward into how technology proves a very important role in the future. But this is a national brand, and you're combining these 22 different agencies. How about local, regional organizations also promoting? I know they're promoting like a region or a city, but do they also work under this brand, or do you work together with them, or how do you try to some sort of align that?
Really good question. Does anyone want to take that, or shall I? It's a tricky question, which is why they're all looking at me. The answer is we work together. I mean, I would love everybody to fall under the brand, but as you can imagine, different regions have their own interests and they also have their own point of view. So we work closely with them. I mean, particularly an issue within the UK is that we've obviously got devolved nations. There are 4 countries here that we are trying to promote, all with their own identities. We feel very strongly that See Things Differently does represent the UK as a whole, and therefore we can dovetail activity. But there are certainly times where we're having to work in conjunction either with city brands or with the 4 nation brands to make sure that we're balancing I suppose, their priorities. What's really interesting actually is stepping back and taking the audience view of that, because in certain markets, they'll have a very clear point of view about the differences between England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. They might have a very clear view on Manchester. Lots of places have a very clear view on Manchester, which is sport related. But other nations won't have that actually at all, and they will think of the UK as homogenous. And I suppose our job is to balance the needs of that audience with ultimately political needs within the country, and also some sort of economic needs. So one of our big objectives, for example, is making sure that we're pushing tourism beyond London. Most people, when they come to the UK, London is the first place that they think of. Of course, we would love them to visit London. We're very proud of that, but we're also proud of a much broader nation. And there's an economic imperative to make sure that people are travelling beyond that. So the short answer is it is a balance, and we have to nuance that for different executions and certainly for different markets, depending on what the audience understanding is.
Thank you very much. Comprehensive presentation. I'm from Embassy of Japan, and so from the same, likewise, the government organization which promoting the national brand. I'm very curious about the competence of your body. When uniting the 22 different agencies, the department in the government, of course, the priorities or focus are different by each. So does your organization have any authorities to coordinate those priority or budget allocation among the different agencies, or each individual department gets a budget from the Ministry of Finance, Department of the Finance individually, and then after you are working for the just coordinating and make the individual campaign more consolidated or united efficiently. So which side does your body has competence in the government?
Yeah, I feel your pain. So the easy answer is that we control the majority of the budget in the centre, which makes things much easier. So actually there's a slightly sort of complicated funding model for GREAT, but the majority of our money comes direct from the Treasury to the centre, and then departments who want to be involved contribute their own budget. But that goes into one pot, which is administered by Cabinet Office. So the Deputy Prime Minister is ultimately in charge of that decision-making process, albeit he sits on a board which has representatives from those different departments who are all involved in that budgetary process. But ultimately, if a decision needs to be made, that is the Deputy Prime Minister's prerogative, which does make it much easier to control things like the branding and the partnership and make sure that everybody is being very consistent. That said, there are also organisations and departments who don't receive direct funding but actively choose to use GREAT regardless because they can see the huge benefits that would add to their campaign. So as an example, the Ministry of Justice at the moment here doesn't receive central funding, but they still use the GREAT campaign very successfully. So it's a bit of a balance, but I do think there is such clear benefit in that centralisation through the budget. It does allow us to hold people to account, particularly in a world of government where there's a lot of movement of people, both at ministerial level and official level. So you're not having to start those conversations again every time, because ultimately that sort of central governance is in place to make sure that people are executing against a centrally shared vision and strategy. If you don't have that, I would highly recommend bringing the budget to the centre.
Kate.
Time's up.
Yeah, I've got one last question for you. It's not meant to be particularly controversial, but obviously we're heading towards an election.
I'm amazed no one's asked until now, yes.
I'm just interested. I know when the campaign was set up, it was done in such a way that it got cross-party support, and I believe it's had that. But now that it's so complex and large with so many priorities, political parties may take a slightly different view about the budget, the direction, so on. I just wonder what's happening in terms of briefing all the parties, whether they take a different view and how it might change the campaign at all, if you're allowed to answer that.
I think I am allowed to answer it to an extent, yes. So we have definitely benefited from cross-party support since GREAT existed, which has been really, really important. And we've actually worked really, really hard to maintain that, not just to defend ourselves against a general election at some point, but actually because of a lot of the work that we do with partners. People don't want to have necessarily a political affiliation. They're very happy to support the UK more broadly, but they might not want to be seen to align themselves to one party or another. So we've worked very hard to maintain that. We're working even harder in the run-up to a general election. We have explicit permission to engage the shadow front bench, for example, and we're having those conversations now. But I think what's really crucial, and the message that we are putting to everyone, is that ultimately GREAT is a tool and a valuable asset in its own right that we have built over 12 years. But it's very flexible in terms of the messages it can communicate. And, a change of policy is something which we can absolutely adapt to. And actually, we adapt to on a sort of daily, weekly, yearly basis already. So a change of government shouldn't change the fundamentals of a brand which is extremely successful, has great cut-through in lots of markets, and actually is a flexible vehicle that can support anything, because ultimately, I think as one gentleman pointed out, GREAT is there to represent the people of the UK and support them, regardless of what political party might be leading us or what policy decisions they're going to make. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, David and Conrad and team at Brand Finance. Delighted to be here and happy to take any more questions off-site now, but thank you.
Big thanks to Kate and the GREAT team for this fascinating presentation and insight into how the GREAT campaign has made it through the past 12 years with great success. And now on to our next workshop, delivered by David Downs, CEO of New Zealand Story, one of the great proponents of the Global Soft Power Index and supporters of benchmarking nations according to their perceptions and utilizing that knowledge and insight to inform a strategy. And I understand this is what this session is going to be precisely about, from research insights to country outcomes, closing the virtuous circle. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Kia ora tātou. Ko tangata titi, ko tangi te kaka, ko tangi hoki a hau tihei Māori ora, e te whenua o tēnei rohe, tēnā koe, e te whare tapu, tēnā koutou, e raurangatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. That's how we say hello in New Zealand. So I thought I'd teach you that, and now you can all repeat it back to me. Nice to meet you all. My name is David. I am going to entertain and hopefully inspire and teach a little bit in the next hour or so. But what I've got, the main job I've got to do is I've got three things to do. One is I want to tell you a little bit about how we use research. Secondly is I'd like to tell you a little bit more about New Zealand, the country that I'm from. And thirdly, I need to keep you engaged because it's hot, it's warm, you've eaten. So I also thought, given this topic is about research, I would selfishly take the opportunity to do a little bit of market research myself. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up, please. Everyone stand up. Have a little bit of a stretch while you're standing. I can see a few of you need it. Move your body around. Now, take a moment to turn to the person next to you or behind you, someone you haven't yet talked to, and introduce yourself. There we go. Very good. Very good. Now that you've done that, here is your task. This is market research live in action, a market research experiment. Between the two of you, you're going to do three things. First of all, you're going to come up with a word that you think of when you hear New Zealand. What's a word you think of? That's the first job. The second job is you're going to come up with a fact that you know about my country, New Zealand. And the third thing is you're going to come up with a question that you would like to ask about New Zealand. A word, a fact, a question, go. And if you're by yourself, turn around and join in with a pair. That's okay. This gentleman here. Yell him out. How are we all doing? A word, a fact, and a question. That should be enough time, I reckon, so you can sit down now, sit down. Thank you very much for taking place in my market research activity. And now I need to report back the results because someone's going to ask me how we measure success. So, of course, I will ask you, first of all, yell them out. What's a word that you think of? Nature? Clean and green. That's 3 words, but okay, cool. Hobbits. Thank you. I'll take hobbits. What's that? Kiwi. Did you say fried rice? Okay, no, that's not good. Kiwi, good. Any more? All Blacks. Maori. Sunrise. But we've all got that. Another one? Wine. Thank you. These are good things to be known for. I'm liking this so far. This is good. Okay. Now, what about a question? Sorry, not a question, a fact. Someone yell out a fact that you know about New Zealand. It's the location for Lord of the Rings. Thank you very much, Ms. Moldova. We've won 3 Rugby World Cups. Thank you very much. I'll take that. Any more? English is the official language. Is not correct, but thank you. I will. I'll come back to that one. Yeah, nice try. We are the first to see the sunrise every morning. Thank you very much. Very good. Well, see, we do this quite a lot. We ask questions about New Zealand to other people because it's really important when we do our research to understand what other countries think about you before you start telling your story. And I always like to hear what people think about us. We did this research very formally, and you'll hear shortly we work with brand finance on some of that as well. But sometimes the best way to tell you what research is telling us is actually to show you a little video. So here's a video when we ask those sorts of questions to some of our friends and colleagues in a country that you will be familiar with by their accent, I'm sure.
What do I think New Zealand is famous for?
New Zealand?
Interesting accents.
Rugby? Something with a black. What is it?
I don't know what rugby is.
The rugby has the black.
The All Blacks. You remember the name? No, that's the name of the team, the All Blacks.
When I think about New Zealand, I think of like zebras.
Their national bird.
What would they be that?
Gonna go for either an emu or an ostrich.
I think the Loch Ness Monster comes from New Zealand. So I wouldn't go in the lakes.
Food? What food do you eat in New Zealand?
I can only imagine anything sheep related. Sheep stew.
I believe so. The New Zealand's famous food is pizza.
Do you eat kiwis?
Yams?
National dish, I would assume it's probably duck.
Duck?
That's what comes to mind.
Most famous New Zealander.
Peter Jackson.
Anybody else?
Peter Jackson.
Call him.
Ooh, famous New Zealanders.
Besides Peter Jackson.
Lord is from New Zealand. That's an artist.
Yeah, I do know Lord.
I had no idea she came from New Zealand.
Oh, yes. Okay, Lord and Peter Jackson.
I just don't like listening to the music because it's just so much. It's emotional.
Do you want to go to New Zealand?
Yes, definitely.
Of course. New Zealand is top of my list of places to go.
Number one on my bucket list.
Mine too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
100%. Sign
Dream
me up.
place.
I'm not just saying that.
You can't wait to go.
Yep, that's right.
I know that people are super sweet.
A loving and peaceful country.
One of the most incredibly beautiful places I've ever been, and I've been to a lot of places.
Yeah, New Zealand's a cool place.
All that stuff. Everything he said.
We love you, New Zealand. Live from New York, baby.
So notwithstanding the fact that our friends from across the water don't always know a lot about other countries, but they do know that you can come to New Zealand and see the Loch Ness Monster, have some of our fine duck that we're so globally renowned for. But the beautiful thing there is, even though clearly they don't know that much about New Zealand, we enjoy this sort of halo, utopian almost image as a country. We're really lucky on one hand that we are seen with such a positive light, and all the data shows us that our reputation is very high, a very admirable place to go, but our familiarity and our influence is quite low. And so our job at New Zealand Story is to try and think about that, is to try and understand how we can be on a bit of a journey to take some of the things that people most know about New Zealand. Our most visible story globally is typically the story of our natural beauty. The country is spectacularly beautiful. It was the location where Lord of the Rings was shot. Yes, you're right. And that is the backdrop. And for many, many years, New Zealand has promoted that as our image. And we always will, because that's a big part of our tourism story. But the challenge is it's only part of the story of New Zealand. And so we, as a country, need to tell a broader story. It's a bit like what Todd was mentioning earlier with Tasmania. We really have to think about the full facets of the story of New Zealand and expand from what people know about us already into areas that they might not have heard about so much, and into things that might really truly surprise them, from the known to the unknowns. And I've stated that very much that discussion that was said earlier too about technology. Even the Great Britain people were talking about things like the surprising nature of New Zealand's tech sector is something that we would like to get across. So that's what we're doing, and I'm going to start that today. So if I've ever given in a microphone, the first thing I'll always do is educate the audience a little bit more about this country that we call Aotearoa. Aotearoa is the Māori word for New Zealand. Māori is the official language of New Zealand, sir. English is not even an official language in our country. Everyone speaks it, of course. But actually, Aotearoa means literally the land of the long white cloud. The beautiful story of New Zealand is that the first settlers to New Zealand, the Polynesian people who came about 1,000 years ago, we were the last country on the world to be habitated by human beings. They came to New Zealand, and over the horizon they saw a cloud, a long white cloud, and they knew that they had come to a new place. And they said, this is Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. It's a beautiful phrase. And then about 500 years later, a Dutch guy sailed past, didn't even stop, and said, it looks a bit like Zealand, where I'm from, so he called it New Zealand. We have no relationship with Holland or the Dutch or the Netherlands, love them to bits, but I've got no idea why our country is named after them. So we like to say Aotearoa, New Zealand. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a few facts and figures about New Zealand, because we get these questions all the time. Our fonts are a little bit weird today, but that's okay. Some of the questions that we get asked, isn't New Zealand just a bit like England in terms of our makeup, our ethnic makeup, etc.? And the answer is no, we're actually very, very different. New Zealand, first of all, we are a first world country. We sit at the bottom of the planet, yes, but we have all the moving parts of a first world country. I like to say we are small but perfectly formed. We have a strong economy, we have a high life expectancy, we have a very high educated workforce. Oh gosh, these fonts are going to drive me crazy. But we're also very strong in the things that the world cares about. We're one of the most trustworthy countries in the world. Every time we do research, we find out that we are the least corrupt, the highest in transparency, one of the easiest places in the world to get business done. And because of English language speaking, because we sit across time zones that span both North America and Asia, very good place to do business as well. And we also have a huge cultural diversity. So New Zealand is populated by over 200 nationalities just in one city, in Auckland. 25% of the population is born overseas. We speak many, many languages. European culture is still a big part of who we're from, but of course we've got our indigenous culture, our Māori culture, as well as many other cultures as well. So we really are like this big melting pot at the bottom of the South Pacific. And that has led to New Zealand's brand value being such a big thing. I mean, we love this particular statistic that New Zealand enjoys this reputation that has given us a very significant brand value. $280 billion US, according to our friends here at Brand Finance. And we're looking forward to the next results, which is right up there with Apple or Amazon. And that's an important thing to talk about, because it sits as an asset on your country's balance sheet, as it were. A bit like the great campaign people were just talking about. It's a real asset for the country that you are building the brand of the country, because then all of the goods and services and the people and the products that come from the country, they get the benefit of the halo effect of that brand. So the more we build the brand of the country and the more that we help companies use that brand, the more value that they will get from it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results tomorrow on some of the new questions coming through that Brand Finance have been asking about people's willingness to invest in a country or buy products and services from a country based on the reputation of that country. Because I think that's a huge link, and it's a big part of the kind of business case for the work that many of us do in this work of country branding. So that's what we're looking for. Another question we get asked all the time: you're just a small country, aren't you? Just a small country sitting there at the bottom of the world. What relevance have you got? Incredibly important from the point of view of soft power to talk about, what is the relevance of a small country. So first of all, let's just dispel one myth. New Zealand is not a small country. Singapore would fit into one of our lakes. We haven't tried, but apparently it would. There are about 5.5 million people living in Singapore. There are about 5.5 million people living in New Zealand. We are a significantly larger country than that one. And that means we have to look after the place that we're from. It's important that we look after the mountains and the lakes and the rivers and the streams, but we do that with the same population that Singapore has. If you look at other countries that are the same population as New Zealand, that's the way I like to look at it, Denmark, Costa Rica, they are basically the same number of the population-wise, but again, we're a much, much larger country. So our influence in the world, yes, is 5 million people, but actually also the territory that we take up. And when you put that territory onto somewhere like Europe, for example, we're actually quite a significant sized country. We would stretch from the top of Denmark down to the south of France. So we're not a small country, we're physically quite a large country. Bigger than the UK, bigger than England and Ireland and Scotland put together in terms of land mass, but with only 5 million people. So our challenge is not that we're a small country, our challenge is that we're a big country with a small population, which changes the dynamic of how you think about things. In fact, if you put New Zealand on the US, we would take up the whole western seaboard. If you put it on top of Australia, basically we cover all the interesting bits of Australia. I've just noticed I left Tasmania off the map, Todd. He's going to kill me later. Yeah, we don't worry about the dry, dusty bits in the middle. We're just, we're the cities where people live. And the other thing about this is interesting actually, because often people mistake New Zealand and Australia, or they think we're one country. And how often can you drive across to Australia? Is there a bridge? Well, the distance between New Zealand and Australia is approximately the same distance as between where we are now and Moscow. So the closest country we have is 2,500 kilometres away. So we are remote. But again, in remoteness comes opportunity and comes an advantage. New Zealand, for example, has the 9th largest coastline of any country in the world. We're significant when it comes to beach fronts, for example. Every New Zealander apparently has 3 metres. I haven't got mine yet, but maybe one day I'll get my 3 metres of coastline. Our airspace is another way of thinking about it. If you think about a country just in terms of its land mass, you miss out the fact that actually we are responsible for a significant portion of the global airspace. And sure, most of it's empty, but that's a good thing, because that means that we can launch rockets, for example, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. So that's another question we always get. New Zealand as a country, aren't you just mountains and rivers and beautiful things, and Lord of the Rings was shot there? So people perceive the natural beauty, but what they miss out on, for example, is our rocket industry. We are the 4th most prolific country on the world, in the planet, in terms of launching rockets. Goes back to the airspace. We've got plenty of air around us. If you launch a rocket and it doesn't work, it needs somewhere to fall. We've got plenty of sea around us. Our rocket sector has currently got something like 240 companies that are currently working in the space industry. Virtually every piece of equipment going to space in the last 10 years has had some component or something to do with New Zealand, which is quite amazing. NASA has a big presence in New Zealand now. So we are really quite significant when it comes to these sorts of aspects as well. Similarly, New Zealand has cities, believe it or not. This is another question we get quite regularly. Do you have Wi-Fi in New Zealand? Yes, we do. And we put it in the cities, and the cities are quite large. If Auckland is the largest city of New Zealand, if we transported that and put it in North America, it would be the 5th largest city in North America. Partly because of the way North Americans treat their cities, but actually our cities are quite large. Here in the UK, if we transported Auckland into the UK, it would be the 4th largest city here in the UK. Slightly smaller than Birmingham, and much more interesting. And then the other one I love to show people is this. People say, we talked about wine. Someone said wine as a fact that you know about New Zealand. Well, here's why New Zealand wine is so good. Because if you transpose New Zealand to the other side of the world, you can see that we span all of the major wine growing areas of this old world wine. In fact, if we kept drawing a line across there, we'd hit Moldova at some point, wouldn't we? So that explains again why Moldova is so good at wine as well. You're so lucky that they're a long, thin country. It spans these territories that allow us to have great growing conditions for our food and for our wine. We've also got 400 golf courses. So if you're one of those people that loves golfing, New Zealand has the 2nd most per capita golf courses in the world after Scotland. And we let them have that one because they did invent the game. So that's good. What else have we got? We've got the world's highest consumer of ice cream. I've got no idea why. I don't eat that much ice cream. Someone's having my 23 kilos a year, because I certainly don't get through that much. I suspect we must feed it to the sheep or something, because there's no way that I get through that. We're also a global superpower in carrot seeds. If there's one thing you remember from all of the talks of the entire 2 days, tell your friends that if there's a storm in New Zealand, the world will run out of carrots. That's an important fact to pass on. Okay. And the nice thing here is one of the other statistics that we're proud of is that New Zealand is one of the most generous countries in the world. When we measure generosity, we have New Zealand coming in at 3rd place in terms of the amount of money and amount of time that people spend in terms of looking after other people. And this is an important thing. It goes to the character of the people in the nation. So for us, this is an important part of the story of New Zealand. New Zealand also has some great history stories. The first invention, if you like, that came in the modern era of New Zealand after the signing of the treaty between the English and the indigenous people, the Māori. One of the first things that happened was the English people who lived in New Zealand started to go, well, actually, if we're not living in England anymore, maybe we need to behave differently and think differently. And there was a story of a guy called Samuel Parnell, who was a carpenter, originally from London, who had moved to New Zealand. He was sort of brought across there on the promise of going to a great new world, but he found himself working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And he threw down his tools at the end of a working day, and he said, I didn't come to New Zealand to recreate the conditions that I came from. God gave us 8 hours for sleeping, 8 hours for working, and 8 hours to spend with whatever we want to do. And he created this labour movement which became globally the 40-hour working week, which has been such a breakthrough in the way that labour relations has worked. And so it happened because he was in a new place, thinking in a different way about what it was to be a worker and what it was to be a New Zealander, not just a Brit living in New Zealand. Ironically, now New Zealand's also pioneering the 4-day working week, which is a new concept that's coming out as well. New Zealand was also the first country in the world where women were recognised with the right to vote. And in fact, this was a good, many, many years before a lot of the rest of the world. The first country, I would like to say we invented democracy because we were essentially the first country where every person could vote. We're also the third oldest democracy in the world. And then the other little story that just gives you a bit of a flavour, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you these stories in a minute, gives you a flavour about thinking differently. This is a river in New Zealand. It's called the Wanganui River. It's where I'm from, actually, in New Zealand. The Wanganui River is unique in that a few years ago it was recognised legally in statute and law as being a person. So in our country, this river is considered to be a person. And in fact, there are multiple things now in New Zealand that are persons: mountains, other rivers, areas of bushland. And that might sound strange to you, but if you think about it, a company is a person legally. And a company has the right to own things, to look after itself, to protect itself, to be protected. And that is what you want to do with the environment. So some clever person thought, well, why don't we just use the same kind of legal structures to protect this river? So this river has the right to own property. It has the right to sue other people, to sue people who might pollute, for example, and to be protected in that particular and innovative way. So it's a kind of a new way of thinking about innovation on a global scale. And that's the sort of idea that we have behind New Zealand, as a country that thinks differently about innovation for the purpose of caring for the environment or caring for people. So that is at the basis of what we call the New Zealand story. My organisation is called the New Zealand Story. In some ways, we're a bit like the Great Campaign. We sit outside of the political part of government, but we are funded by the government, and we tell the stories of New Zealand to the world. But also, importantly, we also tell them to ourselves and reinforce the values and the things that we are trying to get across. Our common story that we talk about in New Zealand, and this is not a slogan or a tagline, this will never be a campaign, but this is the brand essence, if you like, that sits behind our story, is as a country where care for people and connection to place is what drives ingenuity for us. So you've heard a lot about the stories that I was telling you, caring for the environment, caring for the people that live on the land, and where ingenuity has some sort of purpose behind it. The ingenuity of New Zealand and the purpose for that is to basically protect where we're from. We also go a little bit further than that because we're brand people, and we talk about the essence of the brand values, the part of New Zealand that really thinks about who we are and what do we stand for. If we were a product or a service in the world, what would we want others to think when they interact with us? And this is our role as the kind of the country image and brand agency. These 4 values, I'll explain them in a second, but they work together in kind of collaboration. And what we're trying to make sure is that every touch point that anyone has with a New Zealand entity, either a person or a company or a sports team or whatever, will come away with a sense of these values. In the same way that when you rub up against a brand, you kind of get a sense of that brand without them having to explicitly tell it to you. So again, this is not a slogan. This is the first time and last time you might ever see these words, but we hope that the essence of what's behind them will be important. So the 4 of them work together. One is manaki. In our language, manaki means to build the mana of others. Mana is prestige, power, strength, respect. So when we talk about manaki someone, we actually are building their mana and respect, usually through hospitality, through making others feel good. Tiaki is the concept, a beautiful concept in Māori, of care, and particularly of intergenerational care. In the Māori culture, it's quite common to have a 500-year business case. You think about your business, your country, your land that you look after in 500-year increments. And it forces you to think much more differently about how you care for the environment that you're part of. Pono in the middle there. Pono is the Māori word that talks about integrity and honesty and doing things the right way. And that shows up, as I said earlier, in some of those statistics about New Zealand being the most trustworthy country in the world. And that last one on the top there is pōtikitanga. Pōtiki literally means the youngest child. So in a family, if you're the youngest child, in our language, you're called the pōtiki child. And the youngest child is always the challenger, the one who wants to think differently than their big brother and sister, that actually does stuff a different way and sometimes a bit cheeky and takes the risks that maybe the older brothers and sisters won't take. And we thought that's a really good word to represent a country that is the youngest country in the world, the final place where humans stopped. So pōtikitanga, tiaki, manaki, and pono come together to create this kind of essence of New Zealand. And this is why we invented bungee jumping, and this is why we were the first to split the atom or climb Mount Everest. It's because of these values coming to the fore. And when we put them together, they come into a story of New Zealand that is a different story, that does incorporate the beautiful natural environment, but also takes into account some of these other things as well. So I'll show you a little bit about that.
Welcome to the country that cares, where our ancestors navigated the ocean to seek new lands. It's a land where our history unites us. Welcome to Aotearoa, New Zealand, the country forged by ingenuity.
Wow.
Welcome to a land that cares for us, because we care for her. Welcome to a country that continues to innovate with care. Where ancient wisdom has taught us, what is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. Welcome to the country where the landscape connects with you. Where we stand on ancient glaciers and golden beaches. Welcome to a country whose cities are alive. Welcome to a country where learning is embraced. And our manuhiri, our visitors, are welcomed. Partnerships are trusted.
And memories are never forgotten. No mai ki Aotearoa New Tireni.
Welcome to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Together, we can do amazing things.
Just as a quick aside, and because you're all friends, I'll tell you, when we shot that video, or made that video, one of the most controversial things about the video, there's a shot about 3/4 of the way through where there's it talks about the cities, and then it shows some streets and some roads with cars on them. And we had to make up our mind about how many cars we wanted to show, because we wanted to show that was busy, but not too busy. So we had one that had too much traffic, and then we had that no traffic, so we had to find one that had just the right amount of traffic to show you that there are people, but not too many of them. So I trust you all noticed that subtlety, because you're all brand experts. Now, speaking of being experts, so I asked you for questions. So who's got a question that you would like to ask about New Zealand, and then I'll lead into the work that we're doing in our research. No need for Q&A. We'll just yell them out. This is not Q&A's quite yet. You know, when I put you in your peers, I said come up with a word, a fact, and a question. This was mainly a test of your short-term memory. Are we going to change the flag? Good question. I didn't say I'd give you answers. I just said I'd collect questions. Why are we left off so many world maps? Us and now Tasmania. We are joined in our ignorance of cartography. Yes. Anyone else? No. Okay. Let me go on to. I will pick up those two questions. By the way, I promise, along with the Q&A later. I wanted to go into a little bit further though into what we as an organisation are doing. And as per the title of this talk, how that fits into the research work that we do. First of all, as an organisation, we don't just make lovely videos and turn up at conferences and talk. Our main role is to help others tell the story of New Zealand. And again, really interesting to hear the Great Campaign talk about the work they're doing with ambassadors and the way that they transmit their information through others. We have a very similar approach. We can't afford to just do campaign work. If I took my entire annual budget, I could afford one billboard in Shanghai for 1 week. And that would not get the cut through that we need. So we have to get others to transmit the messages and the stories of New Zealand for us and with us. And we do that by offering some services to them. So if you're a New Zealand organisation, you can download toolkits of graphics and imageries and all that beautiful things, sort of stuff that many of us do. We have our own content that we make, that we try and earn media for, or sometimes we'll buy media. We do research, and this is what I'll focus on that in a minute. And we also have some consultancy work. We're helping large organisations and particularly industry groups. And then we manage the trademark for New Zealand, the fern mark. And to your point, sir, this is not the flag of New Zealand, but it could have been. Anyway, so that's the kind of work that we do as a country. If I just skip through to the research piece. So research to me is I call it our license to operate as an organisation. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of people's opinions, like my opinion about what we should talk about. When you do research, you can now have a solid foundation of information on which to base your work, on which to derive your insights. You can test your theories. So research to me is one of the first and most critical parts of any brand agency or any country agency, is to understand the data from the people who know it best, your consumers, the people around the world who you're trying to appeal to. And I say this from a country perspective, but I think it's true from a region or a city as well. If you're thinking about your perspective, you need to get other people's perspectives first. So we do a lot of research. The methodology or the approach we use is to layer things on top of each other. And our research layering, I think, has been the breakthrough that we've done in the last couple of years to really help us understand in a more targeted way where we come from. And again, apologies for the font issues, but this is our sort of methodology of steps. We start with a quantitative data set, and lately, no surprise to anyone in the room, we've been using the brand finance data set. The GSPI we think is a very robust data set. It gives us information in enough detail that we can do something about it. We always get our friends from Brand Finance to do a little bit more deep dive onto some of the actual quantitative data to give us more insights, particularly in the international markets we're most interested in. So typically you can go deeper on a few markets with a few of the facts. But that quantitative data is the starting point, because that says, around the world, here's where you're strong, here's where you're weak, here's what people think of you on these different data questions. But that often asks more questions than it answers, because quantitative data is wonderful to get a big data set, but it doesn't tell you why people think that, and it doesn't tell you what you could do about it. And this is, as per the topic of this talk, we wanted to turn those insights into outcomes. I always think of this framework of what, so what, and what now. So what is the data telling us? So what? What does it mean for us? And then what now? What should we do about it? If you think about what, so what, and what now, quantitative data is brilliant at telling you the what. Now we need to know the so what, and the now what. So what does it mean? So we then take that quantitative data and we'll turn that then into a whole lot of questions that we want to ask people, and we do qualitative research based on that. So qualitative is where you have small groups of people, usually kind of in a panel session hosted around the world. We did about 15 of them recently in different countries around the world. You've got those people for a couple of hours usually, and you've got the ability, based on the quantitative insights, to ask them questions to follow up, to try and understand and give more flavour. So we do that very regularly, once or twice a year. And then we go deep dives into certain countries as well. So sometimes, for us, some of our key markets, Australia, US, China, UK, etc., we might do an even bigger deep dive into that particular market. And then behind the scenes, we're always doing the social media, monitoring the media kind of placements, that sort of thing. So that's our our research kind of overarching methodology that we use. We start, as I mentioned, with the Global Soft Power Index because we think it's a really good, robust set of data that gives us those dimensions and those insights at a different level. So we've got, for example, familiarity, reputation, and influence, the big numbers that we're looking at, almost the funnel metrics, if you like. But then we break it down, GSPI breaks it down by these other aspects as well. And we can then understand where we're strong and weak, and we can understand the relationship between those strengths and weaknesses. And as I mentioned, with Conrad and the team, we go deeper and we look at this by market as well as globally. So we look at, for example, New Zealand's got some really good relative strengths. Business and trade is strong, governance is strong, but some weaknesses. For example, education and science is a weakness for us. I'm not sure I've ringed media and communication. I think that's a font problem. It's actually supposed to be sustainability. So sustainable future is seen as a strength, and yet education and science is seen as a weakness. So that's kind of an insight that we get from the data, from the quantitative data, and then we'll turn that into some questions that we then follow through on the qualitative approach and start to understand why do people think that about us and what might we do about it. Interestingly, also, we're looking always at the data at that sort of base level of when you drill down beneath the high-level metrics, what's the move and shakes? I heard someone talk recently about how data, when you look at it over a long run, can look like a very still pond that moves very slowly, particularly brand data. But when you look beneath or look deeply, you can see teeming life. And for us, the questions that are within here are often the bits where we're seeing the interesting shifts and changes. So, for example, some big uplift in something like being a leader in science is a positive thing for us. We want to understand more about that. So that's the sort of thing we're looking for when we look at the quantitative data. Then it also gives us some real action points. If we plot those relative strengths and weaknesses on axes and we look at the things that we think are within our control as an agency or a country and versus the things that are not within our control, then we can really understand where do we want to hone down. What could we improve, maintain, and leverage? So leverage things are the things where New Zealand, for example, has a high reputation, but we could use that piece to actually increase another one of the metrics. Maintain is where we've got a strong position already and we want to make sure we keep it. Improve is where we think the metrics are telling us that there's a gap, either in knowledge or the way we're acting. And so we're always looking at the relationships, and the data is giving us those insights into those relationships. So based on all of that, we then will hone down and say, and again, the other thing is we're a small agency with a small budget. We have to make some decisions about where we're going to spend our time and effort. So that has given us this is just all on the quantitative data, has given us some clues about where we could spend some time on what we want to leverage and what we need to improve. So this is it for us. This is our real, our aha, if you like, is that we have an opportunity, our strategic focus opportunity is to improve perceptions of science, technology, innovation and space, because they are areas where we think we actually have a good story, but clearly others don't see it. And also food and art and entertainment, they're relatively important, but only if you, from our point of view, only as a sort of a secondary factor. And to improve the things on the left, we can leverage the strengths that people perceive about us on the right. So people perceive us as having performing strongly in sustainability, education, stable economy, etc. Those are all good things. So the trick now is how do we take the things that are good and get them to help us improve the things that we think we can improve. I hope this is making sense. This is the insights then we take through to the market pulse, which is our word for our quantitative survey. So all that data comes from our quantitative survey. All that data comes from that. Then we feed it into those panels I mentioned where we get groups of people together and we ask them more detailed questions. And we did that recently over the last few months actually. We channeled all the data that we got from brand finance and others, those insights, those things that we really want to focus on. And we took people through the GSPI. We showed them the data and then we showed them the sorts of things that we wanted to learn from it. And we gave them questions. As you can see, there are 2 hours of 6 or 7 people per time multiple countries around the world, Australia, UK, etc. We're adding India at the moment because that's quite a big market. We did it in native language where necessary, and we did it multiple times, 3 or 4 panels. So we got really deep insights, and this is the quantitative work. It's a different skill set than this is the qualitative work. Very different insights, and this is where you get the richness of the. If you've gone from the what, now you're into this and we've done the so what does it mean to us? Now we're into the now what. What are we going to do about it? So this data is now helping us understand what we're going to do about it. And the first questions we ask people were things like, what do you think of? What do you mean when you talk about being a global leader? Because we're trying to come back to these opportunities here that we highlighted in the data from Brand Finance. And people said to us, when they think of science and they think of a global leader in science, they think of it being related to biology and the human body, that was quite an insight. So science for a purpose of helping people was important to people. And they gave us some examples of things like, the COVID research, etc. So that was good insight. It's not just about science. People aren't that interested in just science. They're interested in science with the purpose, and particularly in health, human health. Similarly, in tech and innovation, the types of things that they were interested in that they talked about were things that had an impact for consumers. So consumer technology, the Googles, the Ubers, Teslas, that sort of stuff. That's what they thought of when they thought about tech and technology. We asked them what they thought about when it came to science, space exploration. Most consumers find that quite hard because in their mind they just think of kind of NASA and going to the moon and that sort of stuff. They don't think about the main use for space technology at the moment is to look at the planet. The main reason that you launch rockets and satellites is actually because you're monitoring the health of the planet or you're helping with communication. So that's something that's quite a gap in people's understanding. And similarly with sustainability, when you ask people what they think about, they really think about sustainability from the point of view of environmental sustainability. But for most consumers, it gets quite specific and concrete. It's how they act on an everyday basis, how they think about electric vehicles, etc. So this is what we got an idea of what they would consider to be leaders, and then we say, okay, well, how might we, if you think about those aspects, how might we play into those perceptions of leadership? And these are the themes that kind of emerge when we put it through our lens. Was people were interested in other countries' perceptions of us were around: are you powerful and mighty? Can you drive some sort of conversation on behalf of the planet? Do you do things that transform daily life for humanity, and are you caretaking the earth? These were the sort of the key themes that if we said if a country were able to show you these things, that you would consider them a leader. Now the reality is we're not a country of power and might, not hard power. We don't control a global conversation. We're too small to be able to do that. We don't have technology that transforms daily life. So there's no point in us trying to go out there and saying we are those 3 things. But we do things that are on humanity's behalf, and we do things around caretaking the planet Earth. So again, these are the insights that we're getting from the research that helps my team decide where we're going to spend our effort. So that when we talk about the perceptions of New Zealand, I'll just skip past that because the fonts are terrible. Again, the feedback is such that New Zealand is not seen as credible. You're seen as small and isolated. Okay, I have to keep changing that. That's why I do those things at the beginning to tell you we're not small. But fair enough, we are not a national hard power organisation. We're seen as a bit laid back to drive a global change. So sometimes you've got to take the negative as well as the positive. When you ask people questions about yourself, you've got to be prepared for the fact that sometimes they'll have a response that you might not like. But as I say, the things that we consider positive there is that New Zealand is seen as progressive, collectivist, acting on the greater good with a connection to nature. So those are the really strong aspects that, again, lead us to the conclusion that we can actually leverage these things. And so therefore, we're taking those 2 as our main pillars, that we do things on humanity's behalf and that we are caretakers of planet Earth. So this is now where our conclusion of all the sort of market research is taking us on this journey. And then the other thing we did as part of this survey is we showed them case studies of projects or companies from New Zealand and said, does this surprise you? Were you aware of this? And universally, we got really significant and positive feedback. Again, based on the data that we were showing them, We showed them examples of technology that was good for humans, technology that was about caretaking the planet. And suddenly you get this real match because it resonates. You know, it's that people get it. They say, yes, we understand that you are good for the planet. So from our point of view, that really, again, gives us this insight, this sort of the now what part of my framework. How are we going to now use this data as we take these sorts of insights to really concentrate on the case studies and on the media and the content that our limited budgets can now create and land those stories to have some kind of impact, because we know they resonate with the international consumers. They stretch their knowledge of what those consumers already know about our country, and it's very actionable from our point of view. So it's in the end, we're creating a cohesive, authentic story, but empowered by the credible sort of traits that people already know about us. And then our job is now to turn that into stories and content that we can do something with. So this is the sort of, I call it the virtuous cycle, because we started with insights from the markets. We kind of developed that into a more nuanced understanding so that we knew what we could do about it, and then we can start to create content. And the beautiful thing from my point of view, and it's very, very consistent with what we hope our brand stands for globally, as a country that cares for people in place. So all this is a beautiful recognition and reinforcement of our national brand attributes as well. And so to give you a bit of a feeling, these are some of the content that we are starting to produce, built on those insights. This is just a campaign that basically takes some of the data and stories that exist in New Zealand and basically showcases them in a different way so that consumers, this is mainly designed for social media use, can start to understand that actually, yeah, there is technology in New Zealand, but actually it's connected to the thing that I understand about New Zealand, which is that you care for the environment. And so this thing is now resonating because it's familiar, but at the same time stretching knowledge and understanding of the market. So this is the virtuous circle coming to its conclusion. One more piece I'll show you is where we've turned. Actually, I'll just pause that for a second. We've also started to turn that same kind of thinking into our perceptions of how we attract people to New Zealand to work. And again, we looked at the research, we understood what the motivating factors were, and we turned it into some content that might appeal to international audience as well. So this is, again, using the research insights. For example, people associate New Zealand as being safe, as being friendly, but then we start to introduce some of the more concepts that we want to put in there. Diversity, for example, care for the environment as being a big part of our story as well. So this research approach has been a really valuable part of how we create more targeted content. That particular piece of footage and some stuff I'll show tomorrow on the main stage, we got over 60 million hits or views of the content because we targeted it to the right customers that were interested in the message, and the message was resonating with what we knew those customers already thought, thanks to the research insights. So that's my presentation, ngā mihi nui. That is turning research into what are you going to do about it, and then actually creating some stories and phrases. And with that, I will hand it over for Q&A. Thank you. Questions, anybody? There's one down the back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Altak. I'm the founder of Arab Lawyers. I'm solicitor, practicing solicitor. I'm very grateful for your presentation. It was very, very, very useful, very insightful, especially that is, at least I can speak or talk on my behalf. That is, I wasn't aware of so many facts you mentioned about New Zealand. You just raised the point about the scheme to encourage people actually to relocate or to move or to migrate to New Zealand. Let me just ask you a very simple question. Do you have any scheme for like point system or green card or anything to encourage people, at least the talented people, to relocate to New Zealand?
Are you looking for a visa?
At least for European or national citizens.
Yes, the short answer is yes, there are schemes like that about relocation. The interesting thing here is New Zealand has no problem at all attracting people to live there. Like we have significant waiting lists for visas, and we have lots of people that want to relocate. our challenge is often in particular sectors or industries where we're looking for particular skills. And so that campaign that I just showed you there was actually for the construction sector, because one of the key jobs that we're doing at the moment is building lots of bridges and roads and schools and things. We need construction engineers. And so it's not just about a generally move to New Zealand, we're a nice place. It's specifically we need people of a particular skill type, because we don't want to create more demand for skills that we frankly might not need. But to your question, your exact question, yes, there are schemes exactly like that. And one of them, for example, is investor migration. So if you are an investor who wants to invest in companies, there's a scheme that you can get visa access that way as well. Any other questions? Oh, one at the front here. Daniel, always good for a question. Yeah.
Not exactly informational, but you asked us all to come up with one word to describe New Zealand.
Yeah.
What's one word you would describe New Zealand with?
Oh, beautiful. Well, beautiful. Well, that's lazy. That's a lazy word, isn't it? Yeah. Caring would be the word I would like to choose. Caring is the attribute we would most like to be associated with. It's twice in our brand promise: care for people and place. But also in Māori culture, as I mentioned earlier, Māori are our indigenous people, our native people of New Zealand, and to care for others is one of the greatest things that you can do. It builds your mana. Your mana is enhanced when you care for somebody else. And wouldn't the world be a better place if everyone had that attitude? Thanks very much.
A big thanks to David for this hugely entertaining as well as informative session. I think it was so exhilarating we probably all want a bit of a break. There is now a half an hour for a refreshment break up until 4:30 p.m, after which we will come back to the seating area for the forthcoming workshop, the last workshop of the day from Turkey, your resilient partner, about investment in the country and what we can learn from Turkey. After that, we will have a fireside discussion with President Switzerland, followed by our Global Soft Power Awards ceremony, where for the first time we will be giving out the awards for the best nations according to the research that we've done at attracting investment, trade, talent, and tourism. And after that is just the wine reception sponsored by Wine of Moldova and Castelmimi. So I'll see you back at 4:30. Thank you.